Hey, I'm Kelly Albrecht. I'm from an agency called Last Call Media. I'm a senior digital producer there, which means that I produce things for people, our clients. So I work with them to figure out what they might want produced, and I take that to the team and we build it and I deliver it back to the customer as a produced thing, and hopefully a successful thing. Okay, so this is a talk called Agile Design, and we're going to talk a little bit about what Agile is, or why Agile is, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently than what I see when I go to other Agile talks. So a lot of the Agile talks that you might go to might be about the presenter's opinion on how to do something in an Agile way, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why that thing...
Good point.
Thank you. Yes, did it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that thing would be considered Agile, or why something is Agile. And so that'll be part of the talk, and then we'll talk about design, how to design with agility, and why, or how to bring, or how to make your design Agile design. And in between those two, there's a little bit of a dilemma that we'll touch on. So that's kind of an overview of what we're going to do. And in this talk, I'm going to make the case that agility is good, that agility is human nature, that an understanding of it leads to improvement, and it gets us to the right thing with less waste. And therefore, Agile design is better design, it is human-centered, and it will be relevant longer by evolving easier. So I hope to make that apparent through the different things that we talk about. First, though, Agile is in trouble a little bit. There's a recent survey that found that over half of CIOs regard Agile development as discredited. 3/4 of them are no longer prepared to defend it. I don't know if anybody in here has felt that way, that I'm no longer prepared to defend something because it's just trash. Half of them say they now think of Agile as an IT fad. And so what I think the deal is with this is that this is the result of capital A Agile being sold to people as snake oil, basically. Buy into this Agile thing, pay me as a consultant a ton of money, and Agile will solve all your problems, it will fix all the things. And when it doesn't, you get results like this survey of CIOs. Are there any CIOs in the room? No. Well, it would be great if there were, because this talk would really help. I think that this is because Agile can be easy to get wrong. It can be easy to get anything wrong. Similarly, it can be easy to build a horrible Drupal website that on the surface looks like it kind of does what the customer wanted, but it was built in a way that was so nasty under the surface that changing it is incredibly hard to do and incredibly frustrating and the system's incredibly frustrating to use. And we've definitely seen this in Drupal, where Drupal has gotten a bad name by being done wrong. So there are a lot of clients that have said, never again to Drupal, and a number of them are saying never again to Agile. And I think that this is because an understanding of agility is what gets left out when Agile gets sold as essentially as snake oil. So this is a card of a superhero, and the superhero has a lot of agility. And I remember growing up not really understanding what this agility metric was. Like, I understood what the strength one was. Like, the superhero would win in an arm wrestling match against another superhero with less strength. The same with speed. They would outrun them in a race. But what does agility mean? Right? So thinking about this, trying to figure this out as I've tried to understand Agile, you can imagine your favorite superhero that, say, has a lot of agility, and they're in a fist fight with an enemy, and their goal is to defeat that enemy, and then another surprise enemy comes up from behind them with a flying punch, and this superhero dodges that punch and defeats that surprise enemy, and they do that by using their agility. And thinking about that, I think that is because that superhero with that agility has some level of superhuman awareness. It's that awareness that enables the agility. It's being able to know when your reality has changed in a critical way and being able to adapt to that change in the correct way. And know that that punch is coming. Maybe they have superhuman hearing. Maybe they can see into the future. Whatever it is, they somehow were able to be aware of that thing in some super way. And that's what makes that instance of their saving the day, their surprise saving of the day, interesting to us. But to bring it, you don't have to be a superhero to be agile. Every one of us has had some experience with agility. Any time that you've had to change your plans, you've become aware of some new thing that interrupts what you're planning to do, and you've had to do something different, that's your agility. That's your adapting to that change, to doing something different. It may not feel like the most agile thing to change your plans, to have to cancel your dentist appointment, but everybody's flexibility in that occurrence is on some scale of 0 to agility. But agility, there's some issues with that as you try to apply that to your thinking in life. And I think that agility is a little bit more than that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about these two things, deliberation versus hair trigger action. So you have if you think about deliberation on one end and hair trigger action on the other, where deliberation is thinking about something potentially forever and never actually making a decision and doing anything. And on the other end, hair trigger action is complete reflex, like, ouch, that's hot, I moved my hand. Didn't even have to think about it. Okay? So, a person that I know that is knowledgeable about superheroes pointed out that deliberation is like Professor X, while hair trigger action is like the Punisher. So I don't know if anybody knows comic book heroes, might be interested in that, but in a sense, in my opinion, neither of those superheroes would get a lot of agile points on the back of their superhero card. The Professor X may deliberate forever, while the Punisher may reflexively do the wrong thing constantly just by reacting. Okay, so agility is more than just mindless reaction. Let's see. So I believe that your agility is measured by the speed and effectiveness of your response. So you have some changed reality, what you're going to do next suddenly doesn't seem like the right thing, and you think about what is the right thing to do, what is your change in direction that you need to do, and then you quickly come to a decision and you take action to change what you're going to do. And the faster and more effectively that you can do that, the more agility you have in your way of being. So that would be doing something with agility, balancing awareness, deliberation with your speed of response. I'd like to talk a little bit about what makes something agile as being a little bit different than doing something with agility. So we're going to try to get into the topic, which is Agile Design. So you can do things with agility, but what is it that makes design agile versus just regular design? And for something to be agile, for a process or a way of working to be agile, it must bring that awareness to its work and then allow for adaptation, right? So if you're following a process and it has mapped out how you should do a certain thing, if it's going to be considered agile, it should have as a part of that a way for you to get an awareness into the work so that you can know if you're going in the right direction or not. And then it should also have an allowance for you to go in a different direction if you learn something. It should allow for learning. So let's try this on a familiar agile topic. Scrum. Is anybody doing Scrum? Familiar with Scrum? Very good, very good. So how is Scrum agile, right? It better be agile. It's a lot of times it gets conflated with the term Agile. You could go to a whole talk where it's being talked about how to be Agile, but really it's talking about how Scrum is done, or how you would do Scrum. But what makes Scrum Agile? So really, we're looking at how does Scrum bring awareness into its process, and how does Scrum allow for change? So Scrum has ceremonies, which are the regular meetings that you do that are to be facilitated by a Scrum Master. Scrum has values, and Scrum has iterations. So I'll touch on each one of those. I'm going to probably skip the values because that's a topic in and of itself. But some of the ceremonies in Scrum are sprint planning, sprint retrospectives, the daily stand-up, and the sprint review. And all of those ceremonies are there to bring awareness into the work. Right? So the daily stand-up, for example, can bring awareness into where somebody is stuck. And then where that allows for change or adaptation in how you're doing things is if something is stuck, you can then escalate that out. Somebody could be stuck on something that is so critically wrong that it results in canceling the sprint. Because, we never would have known that you actually can't do this thing that the stakeholders wanted us to do, and here's why you can't do it. And so the right thing to do is cancel this sprint. It's never going to happen. You don't want to wait till the end of the sprint to find out you should have canceled the sprint. You find out about the sticking points, when they're sticking points, and then the process allows for that adaptation, for that change. So that's how the ceremonies make Scrum Agile. The values, which I'd be happy to get into later, but going into them now would certainly run us out of time. And I can't overstate the importance of the values, so I've actually grabbed one of the tables for a BOF for after this, for anything that, and I'm thinking I'm going to start going through things a little bit more quickly so that we can get to the end with some time left for questions. But I've grabbed one of the BOF tables for after this. If I breeze past anything at all, like, what's an epic, or what's a sprint, or what is Kanban, any of these types of questions, BOF table 2 after this. We'd love to continue these conversations, and we'd love to go over what Scrum values are. But really, an understanding of these values brings interpersonal awareness to what you're doing. And then I'm going to skip them for now. Iteration, the big piece of Scrum in a nutshell, is breaking things into smaller pieces, organizations into smaller teams, work into smaller chunks, and time into shorter increments. Okay? And it's between those iterations, where iterations are one of those time increments where you say, we're going to work on something for a certain period of time. And it's between those iterations that you can get an awareness into your work via the sprint review, and you can decide to keep going in the direction you're going or change direction completely, possibly even canceling the sprint for the next iteration. So that's how Scrum is Agile, and because it allows for adaptation by bringing awareness into the work and allowing for that change. All right, there's a dilemma here. Considering iterations and releasing things in iterations, there's a dilemma here where if you're trying to bring design into this model. And let's consider this dilemma in an all-familiar phrase and consider it in light of iteration. Right? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Designers, I think, understand this as instinctively. Design, so what is design? Design is creating with purpose, deliberately with intention. And the parts of design that are hard to change later get the most attention. First impressions are arguably impossible to change later because they never happen. So you can understand the pressure and importance of this in some situations, right? I got to think about this today as I was getting ready, and I was assembling my wardrobe and preparing for this first impression, right? And I noticed I had some wrinkles in my shirt, and my motel room had an ironing board, so I thought, I've got enough time. I'm going to iron this shirt. Ironed it. I'm trying to make a good first impression. And if I show up with a wrinkly shirt, I may not get a second chance, right? My shirt may be so wrinkly that nobody ever wants to see me ever. And so I ironed it and I put it back on. And some of you might be thinking, like, you ironed it? Are you sure? And I noticed there's still some wrinkles up here. And I thought, I'm out of time. I've got to ship this version of me. So here I am, Beta Kelly, with my wrinkles, and hopefully I'll get a second chance to make this first impression, but I won't. So you can consider an iteration getting shipped in what a designer might consider a less than state, right? Like the designers have a lot of pressure on them to achieve some sort of goal. And they may feel that with the process of Agile, that their designs are getting ripped away from them and shipped with essentially wrinkles, or to touch on the Head & Shoulders commercial that you may be familiar with this slogan, shipped with dandruff. So there are a lot of studies out there. You probably can't read the bottom of that, but that's crediting the study, where they found that design appeal predicted rejection or mistrust of a product, and the personalization of its content predicted selection or trust of advice sites. And so these two things show that keeping trust in a product takes intention, takes a little bit of deliberate design. It doesn't just happen on accident. You have a big upfront pressure to get it right when you're designing something and releasing something. So there's a lot of stress put on the design team for this. And planning reduces stress. So there's a tendency, desire, and comfort in these planning stages, right? So we often think in terms of our websites. When we think about a website, we think of it as like a single finished product, right? And we think that this product must have gotten designed at the beginning, right? And you've probably even done this if you've written a proposal or estimated something out, where you said, well, first we're going to do a whole bunch of discovery. And we're going to do a whole bunch of, then after we discovered everything, we're going to do a whole bunch of planning. And then after we planned everything, we're going to do a whole bunch of design. And then once it's all designed, we're going to develop it. And then it's going to be done. So when thinking about what the final thing needs to be, it's natural to think that somebody planned it or designed it all the way out at the beginning. And so that goes against Agile a little bit, because you're doing all this work and it's not something that's happening in a recurring way, where you're not, Agile works differently. We're going to get into that a little bit. But thinking in the way that you have a finished product that must have been designed at the beginning before it got created is really natural. So we've got this quote: wherever complex design exists, there must have been a designer, right? So there's this thinking in a philosophical tradition. A number of philosophers from around the 15th century. This is Thomas Aquinas saying this. It might have been in the 13th century, actually. That wherever there is complex design, wherever it exists, there must have been a designer. This was very common in philosophers thinking about where design comes from. It has seemed intuitive to us that the designer is at the beginning. Design, develop, launch. Let's go back in time, back to the 13th century, where this thinking about design was really popular, because Thomas Aquinas went further to try to prove the existence of God. Nature is complex, therefore nature must have had an intelligent designer. So this idea that there is a designer at the beginning of everything. This is very natural for us to think. This is known as the argument from design. One of the most popular people to use the argument from design is William Pele. And Pele would tell this story where, suppose I were walking along the beach and I stubbed my foot on a stone, and I asked how that stone came to be there. I might possibly say it had lain there forever. But suppose I'm on that same beach and I found a complicated thing, like a website is complicated. I found a complex watch I'd be reasonable to suppose that there must have been a designer. And this went on. Pele wasn't the first to think this. Descartes and Isaac Newton also had similar views on watches. The previous watch was from Pele's day. This watch is from Descartes and Newton's day. They had similar views that the universe is, Isaac Newton believed the universe was akin to a watchmaker, wherein the watchmaker is God. And Descartes, like Newton, believed that the cosmos, as a great time machine operating according to fixed laws, is a watch created and wound up by a great watchmaker. Right? And before that, there's a whole history of amazing timepieces. And actually, I should have noted that the watch just before this from Descartes' day and Newton's day was often 4 hours off. They weren't, those watches were not worn to keep time. They were worn to keep the idea, because people liked the idea of being able to wear time on your wrist. But that watch was often 4 hours off in typical beta fashion. But people found value in that day in having a mobile watch, and so the idea stuck and evolved. And there's this whole history of timepieces right up to like the one that I have on my wrist. So it got to somewhere that is incredibly useful for people way before the one that I have on my wrist. But it kept going, and there was a whole history before that. So with advancements in springs and levers and user testing, there's probably a lot of feedback that being 4 hours off is not acceptable for keeping time on your wrist. The watch evolved. And so really I think having the idea of there being a designer way at the beginning is not really how things are designed and came to be. Interestingly enough, Darwin, who was around during Pele's day, had this to say. He wrote that the old argument of design in nature as given by Pele, which formerly seemed to me so conclusive, fails now that the law of natural selection has been discovered. So we're not going to dig into that, into creationism. We're going to depart from creationism at this point, but only to say that maybe design happens in an iterative fashion, right? Hume pointed out that one example that Hume uses of how a machine or a watch is he says it's usually designed by a whole team of people rather than just one person, and that complex machines are usually the result of many years of trial and error, with every new machine being an improved version of the last. So this is a long time ago, before we were all trying to develop Agile. But design really happens by a group of people with a lot of feedback and a lot of iteration. And Darwin also saw that too. If you've been to other Agile talks, you may have seen this before. This is very popular in terms of talking about how agility is good by equating it to the adaptation that Charles Darwin talks about. It's not the strongest that survives or the most intellectual. It is those that are able to adapt to a changing reality. So this is a little bit about what I was talking about, where our awareness and our ability to adapt quickly is our agility, and this has been equated with adaptation. So let's bring all that tangent, let's bring that into the future with us and talk about making agile design, making design agile. So we've been talking about human action and human creation. Let's play with how they combine. So doing something with agility is balancing your awareness and your deliberation with the speed of your response. So let's talk first from the context of each of us as human individuals with our, what I would consider lowercase a agility, just being agile, just doing things with agility. Agility is bringing good thinking to action quickly. It's doing just enough to get started, planning just enough to get started. You don't want to plan forever. As a person, how often have you gotten bogged down with getting started? You're not sure how much to plan. You don't want to get started and make a mistake. But really, you want to do enough discovery, enough deliberation to be able to make a decision to get started and act. Each one of those is critical. Once you do get started, how do you stay on the right track? You look for feedback. Maybe you look for user testing results. User testing is really cool if you want to experience someone acting quickly based on the results. So we've been doing a lot of user testing, and it's been really interesting to see how something that you may have been telling your client forever and they just haven't listened to you, for them to see it as part of a user testing result, and suddenly it needs to change right away. So you can imagine a client that we had recently was an e-commerce client, and we were telling them forever that their content with the different colors and the bold, the different sizes and different fonts were just gross to look at, and it was just too much text. And we proposed different designs, and they said, no, we like our text that way. And so we convinced them to do some user testing. And user test after user test, the users would hit that content and lose trust in the website. They would just be like, I don't even know what this is saying. This just seems scammy to me. And so after that user testing, there were a number of other things, but after that user testing, it was like, we need to change that immediately. And we were like, we've been saying this for years, but user testing is huge to get some real world feedback, to suddenly decide maybe you shouldn't stay the course with your idea that your content is the way it should be. You suddenly learn in a very real way that it's not. And you don't have to do a big quote unquote user testing phase or anything. You can just ask your neighbor. This is my daughter. I don't know. I don't think the audio is going to work, but that'll be better if it doesn't. Yeah. So in trying to save some money, I asked my daughter to use a website that we were redesigning our website, and I asked her. I set up a little task for her to do. Find out if Last Call Media does design work, and when you find out that they do, contact them. And so she was using the site, and she found the menu, and in the menu there was a menu item called What We Do. So she thought, all right, does Last Call do design work? What do they do? And she went into that, and at that version of the website, our idea was, we're going to show people what we do by showing it through who we do it with. And we thought this very complex idea was very poetic and very interesting. And right away in this user test, I could see from this 10-year-old that we were asking our site users to hunt and peck through every logo that we had until they found evidence that may have been evidence that we did design work for that client. And so it was funny because she went to What We Do and she got the logos. And she went into a couple of them, and then she's like, okay, I'll go into What We Do again, as if maybe the second time there'd be something different there. But every time, it was the logos again. And she ended up pointing out that, well, it makes sense to me now that you've explained it, but you're not really going to have people with everyone that uses your site to explain to them what you mean. So I brought this back to the team, and it was clear that we had to make a change. We had to figure out, well, how can we solve this? How can we make it more apparent that we do design work? And so you can go to the website, you can go to What We Do, and you can decide if this quick little change that we made fixed that. And I mean, it's not exactly what our final version of it will be. We're working on something a little bit better, but you can now go to What We Do and see that we do design. And so it was a very easy thing that we made, but we knew we had to do it based on this new awareness of what our product was going to be, and it didn't make sense to launch it knowing what we knew then, and we had to be agile about that and make that change. We shouldn't stay the course and release a mistake. So what about our design processes and methodologies? How do we plan, architect, and design enough, but not too much? Right? You can get into over-planning. A masterpiece mentality ensures perfect as the enemy of the good, right? Where you plan too much to plan what the perfect thing will be, but you take too long and it never becomes anything, right? So it can be said that, and it is said, that a diamond with a flaw is better than a pebble without. So you'd rather have something than nothing, even if it has a little bit of a flaw in it. Agile, when sold as snake oil, often results in management thinking they've escaped the responsibility of deliberation. And so what I think is important to think about when thinking about Agile design is that you still need that deliberation. You can't just throw it away. But you can't do it too much. So it's a balance, right? And the agility is the speed with which you move from deliberation to action. So how much do you plan? How do you know? How do you know how much to do? It's tough to know, but understanding that moving from deliberation to action is your agility will help. And what can go wrong if we don't plan? So you might, if you don't plan, you might leave the house without your coat on a cold day. You didn't think about it. You just went. Design, but on a larger scale, design creates something deliberately and intentionally, and not just haphazard or reactionary. I feel like my slides got messed up. Okay. Without deliberation, without any planning, you lose any hope of control over whether you're selected or rejected. It's just, you're just going to get lucky at that point if you just don't plan and just do things in a reactionary, random way. And so referring back to those findings about design's impact on trust and mistrust, you need to deliberately try to have an effect there. One could argue that design without intention is not design. That not planning, that you haven't designed anything if you haven't done it intentionally. So, how do we reconcile our dilemma of how much do we plan, or not planning enough, or planning too much, for an iterative, maximally effective user event, right? And really this is making for Agile design. So for something to be Agile, it must bring awareness to the work and allow adaptation. So how does our design process bring awareness to its work and allow for adaptation? So I've got some kind of case study type things to step through quickly. This one is for N10, which happened recently, I think. It just happened recently. And so this is a conference where they were going to have us do the branding of it. And we were able to start with the logo. The logo is a wonderful thing to start with because it is a small, high-fidelity piece that you can get a lot from. To get started, we did a limited amount of discovery, just enough to get some ideas. There are no bad ideas. So we follow a process of a little bit of a divergent thinking just to get some good ideas out there. And we produced several in the amount of time that we wanted to spend, high-fidelity directions. And we got feedback. And then we converged toward a solution and responded with the next slide that I'll say. But I will just say that the conversation that ensued following these 4 candidates for a logo was that they didn't want it to be political. So that cut 3 of them. And then the 4th one was just one that we kind of didn't like anyway and threw in there. And so from the feedback and the communication that resulted from this, we switched direction a little bit, and the idea for a state fair theme came up, so we came up with that. So logos are great if you can start from a logo. They get you a lot, right? And so this small increment of the overall rebranding got us a color scheme, got us a look and feel, right? And we were able to carry that forward into some of the messaging that would show up in various places. And we got easy alignment with that because it was consistent with what we already had alignment on, so it was easier to move in these smaller increments. It was less likely that we were going to have to change direction as we were building on the small step before it. And once we had these pieces agreed on, it was not too hard to bring that forward into their web design. And you can see kind of an overview right there. And so one thing that I think is interesting here is I can talk about that in the context of the kind of the language that we've been using so far in this talk, but there's not really anything new to this design process from a bird's eye view, right? I could talk about this process in very traditional, 2 rounds of revision kind of communication. Like, you're going to do your design, you're going to do 2 rounds of revision, and it would slowly work through this same thing. And I submit to you that being able to describe this work in a traditional method and also in an Agile method gives credit to the idea that Agile is very much a mindset. So when you do this and you use the language of agility, of small increments, of feedback and response, it works differently than a more of a waterfall method with 2 rounds of revision, and you should try it out. So now let's consider quickly a design sprint. Here's an example of a design sprint. And so a sprint is a time-boxed length of time, and this was one that we did using for design. There was no development involved in this. And I didn't know this, but 2016 was considered the year of the design sprint. Google Ventures, you can look that up. They do a lot of design sprinting. It's very interesting. We didn't follow that to a T, but really we had a limited amount of time. This was 7 days, and we did just enough planning to get started with an extensive 1-day discovery on-site meeting with the client to learn what they do and what they want. Just enough discovery to get started, so just one of the days was dedicated to that. This was some of the colors of the work that they do, and this client is a virtual heart. They create a model, a computer rendering of your heart, so that doctors don't have to take it out of your chest to do tests on it. They can use this virtual heart to run some tests to see how you're doing. And so they needed some branding and a website. And so we did some discovery, and here's a picture of something that was very influential to the directions that we went. So for day 2, we designed as many aesthetic directions as possible and reviewed with the client to see what they liked and didn't like about them. As usual, they liked a little bit of each one of them. And so, of course, wanted some Frankenstein of all the best pieces. But we were able to take their feedback and in day 3, expand the aesthetic direction, refine some of the illustrations, try to Frankenstein together the best of each one in as best with as many different options as we could come up with in that limited amount of time. And we checked in with the client at the end of this day to see what they thought, how they were feeling about it, if they thought we should keep going. And I believe they picked one of these, so that worked out. Somehow I'm missing a slide. So that moved along very quickly, and logos were not a part of the original effort, but we had some time left in the budget, so we spent day 5 doing an unplanned round of logo designs. We expanded on the single-page design that they approved. We scheduled further check-ins, checking on the logo specifically, and it almost never happens, but they chose the one we wanted them to choose. And we were able to, on day 6, refine the logo and the website design deliverable, and checked in again for high fives. And so this was just 7 days overall, just by doing small bits of work, checking in, changing direction. We got this to their developer, and their developer put it together very quickly. So on day 7, we handed it off to their developer, exported the image assets. And what about that unplanned logo, right? Like, if we had started with the logo, it probably, would it have been? Would we have ended up with a different product? Probably. Would it have been better? I don't know. kind of doesn't matter. There's the logo. It doesn't work on the screen. The logo's up in the top left there. If we had started with the logo, if we had known we were going to start with the logo, the site would probably have those brackets all over the place. But I think it turned out just fine. Anyway, so the logo was unplanned, but it's not like there wasn't any planning, right? There was every single day planning. Do a little piece, meet, plan and replan. And so I think a big misconception about Agile is that there's no planning, just doing. You just do things, you change direction, you do other things. You change direction, you do other things. But really, Agile doesn't tell us not to have a plan, but to always be planning, right? So you start out with a plan, the direction you're going to go, a small plan, a small direction, a small step forward, and then you replan, okay? So not planning has consequences you can think of. Haste makes waste, and we don't like waste. We have to sense and respond, inspect and adapt to remove the waste of going in the wrong direction. So Scrum, to touch back on Scrum, has a lot of planning in it. There's grooming the backlog, which is thinking about the things that you're going to do next. And then there's the planning at the beginning of each sprint. You can forecast out what might be in future sprints. And your sprint releases, or any cycle time really, which is the stretch of time before you check in next, are planning and replanning opportunities. One of the big pieces of Scrum's planning are the retrospectives. The retrospective is the heart of Agile. What should change? What should stay the same? Right? How are we going to adjust how we're doing things or planning on doing things? What should we stop doing? What should we keep doing? This is an important exercise to do on a regular basis, right? To plan and replan how your approach, essentially. Okay, and so bringing this to design, it's really the idea of red is good, right? So we need to find out about the bad things. What's not working, right? And I think a lot of times that's the fear when you're in a 2 rounds of revision situation. What if they hate everything and they hate everything again? We want to know about what isn't working so that we can adapt and change and get the right thing out. And design needs and craves this feedback. One way to bring more agility to our processes, to our design, is by making it easy to change later. Okay, so you can imagine architecture, right? It's very hard for, let's say you're a bridge builder or something, or you're architecting a home. It's very difficult to bring agility to that, where something will literally in the future be set in stone, impossible to change later. When something is going to be set in stone and impossible to change later, you have to plan it all because you have to get it right. Okay, so some things you can't bring Agile to some things. But with design and even with development, we can bring agility to those processes by making it easy to change later. So this is something that we're doing with pattern thinking in design for our projects, where designers are designing more in patterns. That if a design needs to change later, and even though the patterns have all been developed, you can tweak the patterns, and if your site is using a pattern library, all those changes will trickle out through the website. So that is one example of making it easy to change later and making our design able to be more agile, because when it's easy to change later, you don't have to spend as much time trying to get it right at the outset. You'll be able to change later. And one of the big pieces of value in Drupal that I find is its ease of changing it later, right? So you can change the content types, you can change the fields. It's very reasonable to tweak Drupal and change it later if you get some user testing feedback results that call for a change. It's not really set in stone. My designers would be very mad that I put this slide in because that's not the right color red, but I thought it was important to mention that we talked about a design sprint, and we've talked about Scrum, which is typically talked about as development or delivery sprints, that you can do what's called dual track Agile, where you can do those design pieces where you're doing small increments of design, such as like logos, and then moving through iteration into website. Meanwhile, you've got in a parallel track development waiting for those designed pieces to develop them, and they can develop them iteratively. So this is on large, this is kind of the agile method that we use on large projects where there's a lot of ongoing design and a lot of ongoing development. So it is possible. And really this is all a long way to say that we really want to do more together, better, and faster. It doesn't make sense to have the whole team waiting for while a few people plan and design everything. That's wasteful, right? So if you have a whole team of people, you've got designers, you've got developers, it doesn't make sense to have developers sitting on their hands while they wait for design to plan everything out. You want to figure out a way to design out just certain pieces that development can get started on and have that overlap of a dual track. Let's see. So developing, I'm going to cut to the end since we're kind of out of time, but the reality is that we should expect to have things to figure out as we go, and we should do that together, guessing right or making mistakes, listening and correcting course. It's in how we work that lets us do more together, better, faster. We don't wait for the perfect watch to be designed before we make it. We make it, then we make it better and better. Designing with agility is designing just barely enough to get to the making and then designing more. Agile design is emergent and intentional. It hypothesizes, experiments, senses, inspects, adapts, and responds in an evolving relationship with the affected by that design. We don't always have the answers given to us at the start, and that's okay. Thank you. So I think there's time for questions since we have so much. Yes.
When you're making a large website, how do you think is a good way to approach breaking it into smaller pieces to develop it?
So, I like to gain alignment with the stakeholders on functionality because development can build that functionality separate from how it looks. And that's one of the big challenges. I skipped over a story just to land the plane on time today, but it was challenging when I first started trying to do that. It was very challenging for development to feel comfortable with that because of what they were used to before. It's very comfortable for people to both be in that place where they've got a whole phase all to themselves, like a design phase, and they know that they are going to have it from end to end, and then they can write a handoff and throw it to development. And then at the same time, development is used to getting that thrown over to them as fully fleshed out and fully done, and then they can take full responsibility for it. So it was very uncomfortable for, the first time I was doing this with a team, it was very uncomfortable for the development team to get these stories, which were basically like, I want a form that I can fill in this information and save it. And the popular question was, well, what's it going to look like? And it's like, well, it kind of doesn't matter. I just want to do this form. And so then it was like, okay, we'll build you that form. Then they get to the next thing. Like, I want a table of this information, that of all the things that I've submitted, basically like a view. And then it was like, well, what's it going to look like? Doesn't matter. I just start building this stuff. And so while development is building all that functionality, the design team is gaining alignment on aesthetic and designing out what it will look like. So then later in one of those next development iterations, the tasks would be make this look as close to this as possible, follow this aesthetic. And if they're doing it in patterns, they'd be building out those patterns, not even necessarily making that form or that view, making it look a certain way. They would be building out the patterns that would be getting applied to that look and feel. So, and doing it that way, developing that stuff first and designing how it would look later, that gets the developers and the designers communicating. Versus before, where it's all designed all the way out and then thrown over the wall, where you have everything you need. Instead, you've got this situation where development doesn't have everything they would like to have, and they can collaborate with design to get it, and they're all working at the same time. Anybody else? Yeah.
Do you have any tool suggestions for design patterns?
We're using Pattern Lab. Our developers, they don't like Pattern Lab under the hood for reasons that I don't have the expertise to accurately convey. But we're developing our own version of it that's more tightly integrated in with the system that you might be using. So ours, the way that we use it is more tightly integrated in with Drupal, but you could tightly integrate it into WordPress or any other CMS. So it's not quite ready for production or release right now, but we have our own version. But we're actually still on client side still using Pattern Lab. Has anybody checked out Pattern Lab? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. It gives you like an interface for looking at all your different patterns, and so it uses atomic design or atomic thinking, where like molecules make up organisms. The hardest part of it is the terminology, and eventually it all makes up a template. So a template is made up of all these smaller pieces. So there's a hierarchy of terminology.
Are you integrating your Pattern Lab inside Drupal?
Well, so the Pattern Lab, you would be able to view it at the URL of the site that we would want. The client can make it public or not. It is like a separate code base, but our Drupal, there are variables in the patterns, and so the client can actually work on the patterns and tweak the patterns as long as they keep the right variables in the right place, because then in our Drupal template, we call the pattern to use. So we would say that this certain thing uses this certain pattern. And actually, it's even integrated to the point where, like, you can be on the one site that I'm thinking about uses Panelizer. And so you can add sections to a Panelizer page and choose the view mode, and what you're actually choosing are from the design patterns. So you can say, like, I want this view mode, this little block that I'm placing in Panelizer to use the event tall pattern rather than the event horizontal pattern, and it would show it differently, and it's pulling from the pattern library. So yeah, to tie that back in, design can change its mind on the aesthetic, and even though spacing and color and font might have to change potentially, those patterns are already in there, and you tweak them, and then that changes out across the whole site. So it's less of a going back to the drawing board as one might fear if it were harder to change. So yeah, anything that we touched in there, any of the terminology, sprints, or what makes a good user story, or Scrum or Kanban, what's the difference, anything like that. Be happy to run my mouth about that, or talk about anybody in here how their Agile experience or Scrum experience is going, where they work on things is going. I guess that's going to be BOF Table 2. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.